I'm so proud and honored to be here with all of you, sisters and brothers, who've been part of this struggle for so many years. And I've been so impressed, I was so impressed to hear these powerful and eloquent words from our brother, Ron Kovic. As Kelly mentioned, I am a professor of peace studies nowadays and have also been involved in many peace campaigns over the years. And sometimes people will say, well, how did you get into this business of being a professor and an advocate for peace? It's sort of a polite way of saying, why don't you get a real job? But I tell them that ironically it was being drafted into the U.S. Army that taught me about war and put me on a path of commitment to peace. There's a saying that you may not be interested in war, but war is interested in you. And it will come and get you and affect you. And it affected all of us in our generation. And it was just 40 years ago this year that I got that notice for the draft and volunteered, a draft-induced volunteer as we were called in those days, and began this journey of discovery and resistance to the war machine. And our experience in that generation is very parallel to yours today in the Iraq and Afghanistan veterans, as Ron Kovic mentioned. Then, as now, we were lied to. We were told one thing by politicians, what we saw with our own eyes, and experienced a very different reality. Then, as now, we realized that this war was wrong, that it was unjust and illegal. Then, as now, we realized that our political leaders were placing us in impossible situations. They were forcing us into a mission that was criminal by its very nature. Were placing us in circumstances where criminal behavior was the norm. Our political leaders were dishonoring and undermining our armed forces, dishonoring our flag. So we felt that we had to speak out, and we did, as you are today. We organized petitions, campaigns of various kinds. Remember, in 1969, there was a full-page ad in the New York Times, November of '69, right before the big moratorium demonstration in Washington. 1,365 active duty service members from all over the world signed a petition saying, we want the troops home now. And it was a key part of that significant weekend of anti-war action in Washington. Well, today, there is the appeal for redress. Jonathan Hutto and Liam Madden and others helped to create, and now we have more than 2,100 active duty, reserve, guard, IRR members who have signed the appeal for redress. Almost 40 years ago, we organized war crimes hearings, the citizen soldier investigation. Barry and others will talk about that. And you are, this weekend, organizing these historic events to focus again on the criminal behavior that our leaders have forced upon our armed forces. We organized anti-war committees at many different bases, as you are starting to do now. We published underground newspapers. There were nearly 300 soldier newspapers on bases all over the country, all over the world. Of course, we're not seeing that so much now, but then you have the web, and you have websites, and you have your Facebook and the internet, and so many new tools, wonderful tools that we didn't have. But you are speaking out and communicating about the criminal nature of this war, the unjust and illegal occupation of Iraq. But most of all, we became the conscience of our nation as you have become the conscience of the nation now. We spoke with the legitimacy and the authority of those who were in the military, those who were in combat, who saw what it was really like on the ground, who knew the ground truth, as you are speaking today. We spoke as those who were making a sacrifice, who were serving our nation, and in some cases were bearing the wounds of battle, as many of you are today. And the truth is that many of us sacrificed far more than those who were the armchair warriors and cheap patriots and chicken hawks who, at that time and again now, are impugning the patriotism and integrity of those of us who speak out against this criminal and unjust war. So we took on a huge responsibility to speak out and act, and as Ron Kovic said, it's, quoting the words from Dr. King, it is so difficult to speak out against your country, especially to speak out as a member of the military or a recent veteran, against the war that's still going on. When we're being told that to reduce our troops to end our occupation of Iraq is somehow a surrender to terror. It takes courage to speak out. But we are doing that today, and you're following in the paths of those of us who tried to do that 35, 40 years ago. And the GI resistance movement played a crucial role in forcing our political leaders to withdraw from Vietnam. The United States ended that war not because our political leaders realized the folly of their policies, not because they rejected an imperial foreign policy and decided to take a different course in the world. Sadly not. That's obvious from what's going on today all over the world with the continued imperial American policy. No, they ended that war because the men and women in uniform began to rebel and said that we are not going to serve any longer. We raised a voice of resistance and opposition that could not be ignored by the political leaders. They tried to say that the demonstrations that were going on all over the country had no effect upon them. Of course, we later discovered that was not true. Remember when the moratorium rally that I mentioned, November '69, Nixon went on television and said, "Oh, I was just watching football games for all those decent students who are back on campus." And all of us felt at the time, oh, were we wasting our time? But then later we read in Nixon's own memoirs that because of the anti-war resistance that existed at that time, he was unable to carry out his planned escalation against North Vietnam and had no choice but to negotiate for peace. We made that possible. It was the resistance of the American people, and especially the critical role of the resistance of the active duty soldiers and of the veterans and VVAW. John Mitchell and H.R. Haldeman, the officials of the Nixon administration, were especially worried about the role of VVAW. They had meetings in the White House, and they said, VVAW is killing us. We've got to do something about it. And of course, they sent agents into the organization, practically destroyed us, tried to, through the provocation that they instigated in 1971 and 72. But we continued, and we withstood their attempts to repress our movement. And we spoke out as that essential voice of conscience and resistance. And ultimately, the military machine itself began to break down. There were desertions at record numbers, AWOL, even attacks against commanders, desertion. The military ceased to function. There were combat refusals, a polite word for mutinies, where many troops refused to fight. Now, of course, I'm not advocating here any illegal acts, but the fact is that the military cannot function when the men and women in uniform say no. And we began to say that in record numbers during the Vietnam era, and we see it becoming a reality again now. The power of the war makers depends on our consent. And we must deny them that power by withdrawing our consent. We must deny them legitimacy by continuing to speak truth to power and to speak with the authority of those who have been there and who know the real truth. So let us keep organizing our demonstrations and committees. Let us keep building chapters of IVAW. Let us keep reaching out to active duty service members. Let us keep organizing petitions through the Appeal for Redress and other vehicles, and let us keep building IVAW. We will never waver in this commitment. Semper Fi. We will be disciplined, committed, willing to sacrifice. We will be persistent. We will not be discouraged and give up. And we will not desist in this resistance until this war and occupation in Iraq is ended. We will not desist until the entire imperial war system in this country is dismantled. We will not desist until America no longer is an imperial state, but upholds the noble principles upon which our country was founded: life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, equality, justice. We took an oath to uphold these values, and we will continue to uphold that oath to end this war and occupation. Thank you.